Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another session of a journey. In this journey, what I want to do is slowly go through a very important book that's just been published this year, Transcendent God, Rational World, and Maturidi Theology. A lot to unpack here. In this video, I'm just going to introduce the book to you, introduce some concepts, introduce some words, and hopefully if you follow the series, everything should, God willing, come together for you. Before I begin, I just want to mention that a lot of the times I'll be reading from this book directly, purely because I want to make sure that I understand things correctly myself and do justice to the topic. This is an incredibly important book for our age, for Muslims or people who are interested in theology, in belief, how to make sense of belief, how to make sense as a Muslim in a world where we are asked to justify our beliefs. So this is an important book, and I'm just going to, in this video, go through the introduction with you. So the intellectual activity which we're going to be going through in this book, or the field within which this book is situated, it's called Ilmul Kalam, and the English equivalent, if you want to translate it, it's called philosophical theology, right? And so we're going to be going into this as well. And so you'll notice the author says that in Sunni circles, that in theory they are not opposed to its study. So people aren't against philosophical inquiries, theology as well. Muslims have never been against this, and this is something that Muslims have engaged with thoroughly as well. So even though they're not opposed to it, he says that the discipline of Kalam, this particular field, he says has stalled and it's remained stagnant. It's fixated is on scholastic arguments which were developed centuries ago, or on the scriptural, or on the learning and scriptural defense of creed. He says that we live in a world where contemporary thought are profound. So we're facing a number of challenges in the modern world. Development, he says, in the foundations of mathematics and logic, impacted by the conception of rational activity and led to the emergence of analytic philosophy in the 20th century. And then we have the phenomenological movement within the so-called continental philosophy. These words are, for those of you who are not familiar, these are things that are important to be aware of, and hopefully in the coming videos I'll try and unpack them for you. So even if you don't understand some of these words, what I would encourage you to do is just stick with it, and hopefully inshallah, God willing, this will make sense as well. So this continental philosophy interrogates the significance of tradition in the constitution of any reasoned reflection upon the world. And then you have breakthrough in physics, quantum mechanics. So earlier scientific views, theories are now being re-evaluated, right? So this is having profound implications for people who claim to follow religious tradition as well. And then we also have other challenges, for example, the prominence of atheism, especially if you think about the horrors of the war, and there was a demand for what's called logical positivism, right? That we should be able to, like, for meaning to be defined by what can be measured empirically. So, people were now asking the questions that we'll only measure things, we'll only understand things that we can observe with our senses, right? Anything else we're not interested in, right? So we want things, we want to observe things that we can meaningfully measure, right? And this obsession with the limits of human thought as well. So there's been calls alongside this in the Muslim community for what's called a kalam jadid, a renewed theology, a new way of making sense of the modern world, using the tools of centuries of Muslim scholarship as well. So how do we reconcile pre-modern Kalam tradition, what we've been studying for many of us in the madrasa system, the classical madrasa system, um, and all of its subtlety and its considerable resources, um, and in light of what's happening in the world today, the challenges intellectually that we're facing in the world today as well. So we need to ask questions around epistemology. Epistemology is basically truth. How do you know something is true? Metaphysics, things that are beyond um, um, physics, if you like, as well. We need to look at God's nature, His attributes, right? And we need to do this by borrowing and diving into and using our tradition, centuries of scholarship, alongside modern thought and ideas as well. And so he says, look, there's two ways that you can do this. You need to make a distinction in terms of epistemological, meta epistemological terms, between an open model of theology or a closed one. So there's an open model and there's a closed one. An open one is one that's receptive, it's open to taking from diverse sources, right? It's not um, stuck to one type of knowledge, but open to diverse sources of knowledge in its theological structure, and it prioritizes meaning above systematic foundational proof, right? So it's like it's open to all forms of learning, right? And it doesn't deny one or the other. It goes through all of them. The other one, he actually says this is the way our author Imam Maturidi, who we'll talk about in the next video, he says this was the way he approached the world. This mutakallim, this theologian, when he approached the world and made sense of the world, made sense of truth, tried to understand truth, what he essentially did was he was happy and willing to borrow from diverse sources, not even Islamic sources per se, to make sense of the world. And we'll come across this as well. The second type is what's called a closed theology, and it excludes concepts that cannot be justified foundationalistically. Foundationalism is basically an idea that it's built on this idea that everything has a foundation, right? It has a basis. And so this is something that he says as well. And he says, look, once I can show you, the author says, once it can be shown that there's room for non-foundationalist epistemology, right? There are other ways of making sense, of knowing truth. Then we've opened a door to conceptualizing kalam, theology, that is self-reflective about its own contingency and thus receptive to overt dialogue and development. Basically, the way I understand that is once you have an openness approach to making sense of the world and knowing truth, once you realize that, what you can then do, because you have an open mindset here, then you can open yourself up to understanding other ways of understanding what is true and what is not as well, right? And you know that you can have dialogue with even people of our time and age as well. Okay. Now he says that the core theological problem raised in his book here is how can we, as finite, limited human beings, right? We're always limited in what we can know, what we can do, right? And we live in this world. So how can finite human beings, people like me and you, use language to speak rationally about the transcendent divine? So how can we use language? How can we speak about God? How can we speak about Allah, right? Who is utterly beyond this world, who is beyond us, right? And how can we make sense of God rationally using our intellect? Can we do that at all? Or is there a way that we can do that by looking at what we have in our 14 centuries of this rich Islamic intellectual tradition, but also looking at authors, looking at writers, looking at philosophers, theologians of the modern time, modern age, be it Muslim or non-Muslim? Can we learn something from them? And is this what Imam Maturidi, who's going to be a central figure in this book, is this what he did in his time when he was around? Did he approach knowledge and try to justify knowledge by looking at other ways of knowing as well? He says that within his system, Imam Maturidi's system, the world is always amenable to a rational analysis, right? We can always analyze the world rationally, right? And it provides indications towards God. So the world indicates towards a creator, and you can make sense of this rationally through one of these two kinds of inference, which we'll talk about as well. And so this is what makes systematic theology possible. So what I'm going to do, hopefully in the next video, is move on to the first chapter in the book, which is called Tradition and Reason. It's quite a long chapter, so what I might do is divide the chapters up and just go through various aspects. Just as an introduction to the next chapter, just to prepare you. Now, one of the things that you'll always hear, by the way, even today, is that there's two areas, two distinct areas. One of them is tradition, and one of them is reason. A lot of times, people like to paint them as two inseparable, two separated areas. Rather, they're completely separate. So you have one where you inherit a tradition from people before you, scholars before you, and you have another one that just says, forget all of that. We're just going to use our reason. And this is often presented as a binary, right? Even in Islamic intellectual history. And what we'll come to see is this is not true. What Muslims did and are doing is they inherited their tradition from their scholars from the past, but they also were very critical of what they were inheriting. So that doesn't mean they rejected, but they were placing it under a critical lens as well. Dr. Sherman Jackson, who I love, by the way, in terms of his scholarly academic output, he says that the Muslim rationalism, in its familiar guise of kalam, reflects an ideological effort to ensconce a specific Aristotelian Neoplatonic formation of reasoning as paradigmatic. So, in other words, even when Muslims were trying to make sense of the world using the Quran, using the Hadith, and various other sources, they were using non-Muslim ways of knowing as well, right? So Aristotelian, Neoplatonic ideas as well. And also it's worth remembering, and this is a key thing for this chapter that we will cover in the next video, is that when we listen to revelation, wahi, it's always heard, understood, interpreted, and transmitted by human beings whose sense of reasonableness is embodied in their histories. So we always use our reason, even when we listen or read the Quran, revelation, if you like, we're still subjecting it to reason, right? We're not just blindly following the Quran or the Sunnah for that matter, but in fact, when we receive things from the past, we are subjecting it to some sort of critical analysis as well. And so the author wants to develop this idea of kalam jadid, a new way of making sense. And this particular section, this particular chapter is divided into various parts. I'll just tell you about them, and then hopefully in the next video, we can go through the first one. And he says the first thing I want to do is I want to go through our author, the person that he's studying, Imam Maturidi, and his conceptualization of his own epistemic commitments. So what was his, how did he understand truth? How did he construct his way of knowing truth? And he's going to contrast this to non-foundational approach with later school figures. So I'm going to talk about what foundationalism is and what non-foundationalists are, who they are, and so forth in the next video. In the next section, he wants to ground. He gauges the implicit grounding of his work within a range of pre-existing philosophical ideas and theological discourses. So we'll do this as well. So don't worry about all of this. In the next section, what we'll do is we'll examine the development of Maturidi's tradition through formative classical, late classical, and modern phases. So what happened so who was Imam Maturidi? What was his idea? How did he make sense of the world? And where did he get his ideas from? Was it just from the Quran and Sunnah, or was it from other ways of knowing as well? And so did he borrow from pre-existing philosophical, theological ideas? And then how did that develop after him? People who inherited his tradition, who took on his tradition, did they follow his way of thinking, or did they develop their own distinctive methods as well? And how it interacted. So this Maturidi school, how did it interact with Ash'arism? And what did Avicennism, Ibn Sina's ideas, what impact did this have on the Maturidi tradition as well? And finally, in this particular chapter, we'll look at Western philosophy in Immanuel Kant. And so we'll look at this as well. in this next series of videos as well. Hamza, you've asked a question. This is not that one. This is this book, which has been published. Uh, so I'm reading through the book, inshallah. And what I want to do with everyone is just to go through this book slowly, carefully, and try and make sense. And I think this book is really, really important, actually, for people to read. It's quite a heavy book, especially if you don't have a background in theology or philosophy. But I will try to sort of break it down, simplify some concepts, and try and make it accessible, because I do believe it's a very, very important book as well. This book you can buy from, you can buy it from Edinburgh University Press, their website directly. If you email me or message me, I can give you the link. And you get a discount code as well. If you message me, I'll give you the discount code as well. Definitely worth buying. It's in hardback at the moment. And Dr. Rahman is, mashallah, an excellent scholar, excellent academic. He's given a lot of time and energy, and invests a lot of time and energy in writing this book. So I do believe that we should, as Muslims, as people who are interested in truth, we should support our scholars who are giving incredible time and energy in writing books, in giving, burning the midnight oil. These people are literally sacrificing their luxury, their pleasure, so that we can benefit. So we should these are living people. These are people that are living with us today. So we should benefit from them. And I hope that I can do some justice to this book. So I'll continue with this series of videos over the next few weeks, God willing. And as always, you can always reach out to me. You can always ask questions, and we'll take it from there. Until next time, stay safe. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.